My name is Steve Harper. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Owner Insight, and I'm so grateful that you are joining us today for another episode of Leadership as a Contact Sport. I got to tell you, this has become one of my favorite series to record for because there are so many incredible people out there doing such incredible work. And today's guest, Richard Gay from Fort Bend ISD, is no exception. Not only did he serve our military, but he's taken years of experience and has molded how school districts are doing what they do, specifically around purchasing and staying in control, not just in construction, but everywhere. My team met Richard through training they attended for TASBO, and they were just thoroughly, thoroughly impressed. They're like, Steve, you got to meet this guy. So Braden Davis from our team connected us. We had this great conversation. I just knew instantly he is someone we had to get on the Leadership as a Contact Sport series because he just knows how he wants to do it. He's very, very direct about his approach, and he has the best interest of the public dollars that he's been entrusted with to make sure that the projects and the investment of those dollars are done correctly. I just loved his energy. I loved his vibe, and I can't wait to dig into and hear some insider baseball for his leadership philosophy and strategy because I think he is going to be just dropping some knowledge nuggets, some gold bars of opportunity for you to learn from and to maybe put to work in your own life or your own career. So I'm so grateful that Mr. Gay has agreed to be a part of this series. So with no further ado, let's get started with Leadership as a Contact Sport with Richard Gay, Fort Bend ISD. Thank you so much for joining our Leadership is a Contact Sport segment, Mr. Gay. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, thank you. It's warm and muggy here in Houston, so we're like always.
Yeah, it's I don't think we're, I talked to somebody a couple of days ago that was like, "Oh, Texas would be so great in the spring." I'm like, "We don't have spring. We go
No,
from like sort of cold to like, yeah, it's just going to be brutal."
yeah. Wait a minute, and we
Yeah.
have down here we have mosquitoes the size of B-52. So it's like yeah,
Yeah, you get state issued saddles for them down there. I understand.
yeah, yeah. I had a mosquito bit me the other day and it burped. So I just
I love that. Well, I really appreciate you doing this.
sure.
I really enjoyed our initial conversation, and obviously, I think one of the things that really caught my attention is just sort of your leadership style, the approach that you're taking. Obviously, there at Fort Bend, but obviously for the rest of your career, what you've done and in your experience. But so I've got several questions I want to ask you about leadership. But when you think of the word leadership, what comes to mind for you?
I follow a model. I followed over time. I've adjusted my leadership role and my model. For example, when I was in the military, and was a battery commander, and I was a platoon leader, and all those things. Your leadership style is more directive in nature. You
Sure.
tell people, I need you to move over here. I need you to do this. I need you to get this done by such and such a time or whatever, and that works when you're in the military, and people understand that there's a hierarchy of rank, and rank has authority and everything, and they do it because there's severe penalties if you don't follow the orders. You can go to prison, things like that. So, but when I got out of the service and I began to my civilian career, um, civilians don't react too well to directives in nature. So I've had to, over time, adjust my leadership style to lead by example, and also more of a service and a caring attitude about people. What do you need? What resources can I get for you? How can I help you achieve what you need to achieve? So you adjust based on the environment that you're in.
Yep.
When I got into public education, I also work around a lot of women, and because it is a predominantly dominant woman type environment, and it's not like being in the locker room with the guys or being on the gun line with the troops. You got to watch your language. You gotta speak softly, and you have to make sure that you say, I would really like you to get this done if you could by a certain time. Please tell me,
Please
you
and
know, if
thank
you
you.
can.
Yes.
Yeah, you have to, it's almost like you're talking to your. I think of it. How would I say this to my daughters or my wife?
Yeah. Yeah.
The only thing is my daughters would cry, and my wife would hit me. So I mean, I have to kind of figure that out, But it's you have to change based on the environment. But I think the number people will always say that you want to lead by example. So you don't have any kind of extra expectations over anybody that you wouldn't have for yourself.
Right.
And so I try a model that I've recently begun to embrace is what they call the service leader, one that's there for you to help you to make you be a success and everything. And so that's where I get that, what can I do for you? What resources do you need me to provide for you to be a success? And then mentor and guide, the younger people and everything, so that they can be a success.
So I'm curious because I mean, first and foremost, I want to thank you for your service to our country. Obviously, you had a long career, and then you went into the reserves for a long period of time. And what was the difference when you saw, maybe was there an example of someone that you served under, or you saw exude a certain level of leadership that really stands out to you? And could you give us, maybe a little quick story or rundown of that?
Yeah, a gentleman that was my superintendent when I worked in Baltimore. His name was Joe Hairston, Dr. Joe Hairston. He had graduated from University of Maryland Eastern Shore. He had come from a large family that was not well off. They weren't real rich, but he had gone to school on a football scholarship, and he was a big man. Let me tell you. Um, his hands were about the size of my thighs. I mean, he was just huge, and he played offensive line, and he actually played for the Washington Redskins. But
Oh
then
wow!
he hurt his knee a couple of years in, and so his career was pretty much over. And so he went in. He had gotten a teaching degree, so he went into education. And he was my superintendent when I got to Baltimore in 2001, and he and I worked together for 12 years. And that's pretty unusual. A superintendent stays that long. Here in Texas, we say you're three and done. Usually because the board, either you get tired of the board or the board gets tired
Or
of
gets
you.
started you. Yeah.
But he just had this. He just exhumed confidence. He was very loyal to his staff and to the people that did things that he wanted done. And so, I took to heart a lot of the lessons that he taught, in those examples. And so, he always supported everything I was trying to accomplish in procurement. He understood that was a very regulated field, that was a very, we were always audited. We were always under, we had laws that we had to follow and obey and things like that. And he respected that. And he respected your knowledge and your, he didn't try to pull rank on you or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Uh, but he would say to you, he said, one of the things he taught me was, I know you're going to tell me the answer is no, but how do we get to yes?
Yeah.
What can we do to get to yes? And so then, you would sit down with him and explain to him, well, this is the steps that we have to do to get to yes. And he said,
Yeah.
well, how much time will that take? And then he would either say, well, can you shorten that time, or can you, do you have to do? And I would always say, well, the law requires us to do this. And he goes, okay, all right, well, get us there then. Get us to yes.
That's
And so
great.
then he would support you, and he would keep everybody off your back or whatever until you got there. But he would want you to keep him updated. Where are you on this? How, do we have this going? And, yes, sir, we're moving as fast as we can on this. And so that's one of the guys that I remember the most in that. Um, in the military, I had a gentleman, one of my first battalion commanders. He he probably saved me from being afraid of flying.
Hmm.
Um, his name was Lieutenant Colonel Arnie Rossi, and he asked me to do some aerial observation call-in missions. I was an artillery officer, so I went up in this OH-58 helicopter with a pilot, and we were flying close to the impact zone, and we were calling in artillery missions from the air. And the helicopter lost all power. And so we auto rotated and augured into the ground. And it's a scary thing. And you start saying your Hail Marys and everything when you hear the pilot going, "Mayday, Mayday, we're going down," and everything. And we hit really hard.
Not want to hear.
Yeah, I don't want to hear that when I'm flying with you. Okay. And so we kind of corkscrewed into the ground and everything. And we had to be careful about, the blades were rotating over us and everything like that. But we got out and I walked away. And I'll never forget that night. We were in the Tactical Operations Center, and we were sitting there having a staff meeting, and Colonel Rossi was briefing about how we were going to do missions the next day and everything like that. And one of my buddies said, he's looking at you. And I was holding a tin cup of coffee, and my hands were just shaking like, nobody's business. And he said, "Okay, well, we got another helicopter, and this one works." So he said, tomorrow we're gonna go up and do those missions again, and Lieutenant Gay, you will be calling in the missions. So, his thing to me was, and he looked at me straight at me. He says, "Do you understand? You will be calling missions tomorrow." And I went, "Yes, sir. Okay."
Yeah.
And so his whole thing was, "I'm going to get you back in the saddle because I don't want you to be afraid of flying." And if he had not done that, I might have been one of these guys that would never get on an airplane again or ever again. And so he made sure he knew that he had confidence in me to get back in the air and do the missions. And 11 years later, I became a paratrooper, and I was jumping out of airplanes, but I had a parachute on at the time. So, it was a little easier, but, that's how crazy, life can treat you sometimes. But I'll never forget him. He was dead set on making sure I got back up in the saddle and got airborne again so that I would never be afraid of flying.
And there's so much to unpack in that, just the fact that you survived it, there was nobody was hurt and, or worse, but the fact that he recognized in order for you to continue to do what you needed to do, he needed to get you back in that saddle. And when you think about leadership, I'll deviate just a fuzz, but I mean, when you think about leadership and your people make mistakes or have challenges, and you see some leaders that will just come down hard on them and certainly go out of their way to make them feel bad for the mistakes that they make. And then you have other leaders that are like, well, we know what not to do, and we know what isn't going to work, so how are we going to go about figuring out how to get that no to the yes, right? So I just think those are really good parallel lessons in a big way, but show real strong leadership.
Well, I think one of the things too is your people have to, I think, have confidence that you're in their corner with them. Yeah. So we made, I always tell people, you need to be careful in the procurement world. You don't want to end up on the front page above the fold. Okay. Yeah. And you pray to God that they don't have your picture. Okay. Yeah. But we did. When I was in Baltimore, we made a mistake on a procurement, and we ended up in the paper. And I remember going to the board meeting, and the board members looked at me and they said, "Mr. Gay, who's responsible for this? Who did this?" And I said, "Well, I'm responsible." And they go, No. We know you have buyers and people down below you that, who screwed this up?" And I said, "I'm responsible for this mistake. I'm the leader. I'm the director of procurement. I am responsible for everything we do or fail to do. In this case, we failed to do something. We missed a step, which means I'm responsible." And I was sitting next to the executive director for facilities. As we were walking out, he said, "Man, that's the gutsiest thing I ever saw." I said, that's just leadership, man. Now I'm going back to my office, and that buyer's coming into my office, and we're going to have a conversation about, we're never going to do this again, because I'm never going to go up there again and admit that, we made a mistake. But that buyer became very loyal to me then, because I'm just like Joe Hairston would back me up, I back them up.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think that that's where you get having that kind of loyalty. If they know you're going to stand by them, and I think too many leaders are in the realm of self-preservation, or I got to protect my job, protect my status, and so everybody else under me is expendable.
Yep.
And I don't believe that. I believe that you have to protect your people. You need to, because they're resources, and you want to protect your resources. And so that's how I've always treated them.
I love that. Makes me think of a conference that I was at years ago, and Colin Powell spoke and talked about, you know, clear communication, understanding the mission. There are no dumb questions. Get those things on the table, so that everybody feels like they have a voice. But he said, how you're a good leader is when people follow you for no other reason than out of curiosity to see where you're taking them, right? And he said, when you think about that responsibility and how the challenges, especially in wartime, right? How that has a whole different, play out. But he said, really, at the end of the day, I needed to be able to tell the moms and dads and maybe soldiers that wouldn't make it back, that this is why what we did. They understood the risk. They knew what they needed to do, and they still went anyway, right? And I just think there's some parallels there for sure. And I think, like you said, it's, if you're going to be an effective, good leader, people are paying attention to how you respond and react in good times, but especially in the bad times when things aren't going your way. And stepping up like that, I just love that because, like you said, I mean, it really exudes strong leadership on your behalf. Which
I never had anybody quit or leave my office while I was in Baltimore. In fact, my boss said, "Boy, you got a bunch of lifers there. They're going to stick with you forever." And I said, well, and I did. I had one person who passed away. Can't do anything about that. But
yeah,
you know, um, but then I had one lady that left to go work for the federal government instead of local government. It was a raise and everything. You understand those kind of things.
yeah,
But people weren't bailing out because the environment was
yeah.
untenable or intolerable. I think it was Dwight Eisenhower. You bring up Colin Powell. Dwight Eisenhower said, "Beating your people over the head is not leadership; it's assault." Okay, but it's not leadership.
I love that. Yeah. That's a great line. I have not heard that, but that's a really good one. So the fact that you made give us a little bit of background and history in terms of your career path. So you left the service, you went into the reserves, but then you went down the road of public education. What was it that drew you to that?
Well, yeah, I served when I graduated from Stephen F. Austin here in Texas. I
You're
got
a
my
lumberjack.
commission. Yes, sir. I was a lumberjack, and I went into the Army as an artillery officer, and I served on active duty in the regular Army for 14 and a half years. And then after Desert Storm, they decided to reduce the force, and I saw that there weren't going to be the same career opportunities that I thought would be there for my whole career. So I knew I could be successful on the outside as much as I was on in the military. So I had my master's degree and everything. So I left the service,
Yeah.
and and I knew I could still stay in the reserves and work towards retirement and all that other stuff. So I started out. I worked at UTMB in the state government. Working around a bunch of doctors wasn't a whole lot of fun or anything like that. And so then I went into healthcare. I worked for a large hospital, and really, it was kind of mundane. Really didn't excite me, didn't keep me
Yeah.
going. And so I saw an opportunity to go work for my old alma mater in high school was Clear Creek. I had gone to Clear Creek High School. Well, they were looking for an assistant superintendent of business services, and so I said, "Well, I'll send in my resume and everything." And I worked for John Wilson, who was the superintendent at the time, and he and I kind of hit it off and everything. And so here we are. I got into public education. I worked for John for a while. He kind of left. The board got tired of him, and he left. So they got tired of me, so I left. And I went up to Plano. And then from Plano, I worked in Plano for a couple of years, and then I went over to Baltimore where I worked for 14 years. And then I wanted to come home back to Texas, so then I came to HISD. And I, in all those years, I had kind of gravitated away from multiple departments to procurement, and I really enjoyed that. It was, to me, it was exciting, and I was one of the early adopters of e-procurement platforms and doing online procurement and procurement cards and all the things that a lot of people in school business don't want to have anything to do with, you know.
Yeah.
But I found it exciting and innovative and everything. I'd grown up in the space program. My dad worked for NASA, and so
Wow.
he had been in the Gemini, Apollo, Space Shuttle, those kinds
No
of programs. So I was used to trying new things and, you know, breaking the envelope and, who moved my cheese, that kind of stuff and everything.
Yep.
And so I was always willing to try something new and different and everything. And so then I spent 4 years at Spring Branch after leaving HISD, and now here I am. I'm in my third year at Fort Bend, and all the things that I've learned over the years, I'm instituting at Fort Bend. But it's created for me an entrepreneurial type spirit in that, for example, we brought in a new platform, and the platform we now have 16 online catalogs, and it gives us an opportunity to create savings, because what it does is it compares like items. So if you have multiple contracts of the same type, it'll bring up for you what they call a savings opportunity. And what that's enabled me to do is to stretch campus budgets. So right now, we've saved roughly about $40,000 this year, and then we got another 150,000 in rebates off of these contracts and things.
Yep.
And so the way I sold the platform to my boss was, if I bring in these rebates and we create these savings, if I save 150 to 200,000, but the platform only costs 63,000, it's budget neutral. Plus, you've expanded the capability of schools to have more money to spend, because they're actually enjoying the savings, because they're not going through their budgets as fast, because they're buying cheaper items, the same item, but they're buying it at a cheaper price.
Yeah.
So, that's how I sell things to my boss, is that if I can get money back or revenue, stretch the revenue, then it pays for itself, and you don't have to worry about what that number is in the budget. Too often
That makes
in school budgets, it's just a number, and it's an expenditure, and nobody ever really looks at, well, what's the value of that expenditure? What's the bang for the buck? What does the school district get? Well, you bring in something like e-procurement platforms. Okay, I'm going to spend $63,000 a year for the subscription for this, but I'm generating savings of $40,000 to $80,000 a year. I'm getting rebates back of $100,000, $120,000. That's $200,000 that was never in the district budget. Okay, so now you've stretched the budget, brought in revenue, and so it pays for itself. And unfortunately, I don't think a lot of school business people or government business people think that way. They don't see what's the value that I bring back. And I think I learned that when I was in the corporate world, in that I had a boss that said to me, you need to do two things to keep your job. You need to either make money or save money, preferably both.
Yeah.
And so if you didn't do either one of those, you didn't have a job.
Yeah.
Because they weren't going to carry you. You had to show value. So that's what I do. I spend a lot of time analyzing, what are we saving? What are we making on the KPI end of it? And, those kind of things. And those are the things that I make sure that my boss sees, so that, because like right now we're looking at, in our district, we're looking at about a $34 million budget shortfall.
Yeah.
I'm one of the only departments that can make the claim, I make you money.
Yeah.
So don't look at me to cut my positions.
Yeah.
Because I'm making money for you. I'm paying for myself.
Yeah. And then
not everybody says that or can say that.
Yeah, which is kind of sad, because like you said, if everybody kind of approached it that way, how different some of those environments might be, right? It's and some people might say, well, that's kind of impossible because I don't have direct control over certain things, but everybody should always be looking for ways that they can contribute and add value, right? And maybe it's not a direct line item per se in terms of an acquisition or purchase of something, but at the end of the day, it's like, let me show you how from getting from A to B actually has a positive net result for the district or your business operation or whatever the case might be, as opposed to, well, I don't know, that's somebody else's job and it's somebody else's responsibility, and then they wonder why when things don't go well they might be on the chopping block.
Well, that's why I found, I've been reading up through the Wall Street Journal and some of the other things. I'm fascinated by Doge.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
it's very fascinating what they're finding and how they're saving things and everything. And I'm thinking, well, why don't we have that mentality? And when I read an article about one of the young, Atari kids that's working over there on that side, uh, he was in a meeting and they said, oh, well, it's going to take us 120 days to convert this toggle switch on a computer program so that people can move the web page over to another web page. And this kid goes in and he moves everything in 71 minutes. And everybody. I had a buddy say, well, yeah, well, that's because he's, when you take a meat axe to it. And I said, no, he didn't take a meat axe to it. I said, this is the difference you get by somebody who works out in the corporate side, who knows that time is money and has value, versus a government person who gets paid whether they achieve anything or not. Okay.
Right.
And so he comes in and he says, well, if I didn't move this thing in 71 minutes, I'd lose my job. You get 120 days? Really?
Yeah.
The IRS was saying they went into the IRS and they said that they've spent several $billions over 25 years trying to upgrade the computer systems at the IRS, and they have failed 4 times. And somebody looked at them, well, who was in charge of that program? And somebody in the back raised their hand, and they're still working there. They failed 4 times, but they're still working there. And
Yeah.
you're going, if I was in the corporate world, they'd have shown me the door after the first time.
Yep.
You know?
Yep. Yep.
So, we have to, I think, come up with this. It's not about spending the money. It's about spending it efficiently, and having money left over is fine. Okay. And maybe we come up with a bonus structure or something for people who do good things, or whatever. I don't know. But I think when you're $36 trillion in debt, there's not many companies that can survive that kind of debt structure. Okay. And so, I think you really do need to run it as a business. Now, yes, granted, there's Social Security, there's Medicare, there's Medicaid, there's the VA, there's all these things that are mandatory by law. Okay, fine. If I have to provide that, but then where are the opportunities for me to provide those services at a lower cost, a more efficient way? Recently the VA made the decision that they were going to send people, instead of going to a VA hospital, you could go to any hospital, like you were on Medicare or Medicaid, and we'll pay for it. And just like we would insurance. In other words, let's treat the VA as if it's insurance. Well, okay. That's something never tried before. And if it works and it's more efficient and we take care of our vets, who cares?
Yeah.
You're still
Exactly.
taking care of the vets,
Agreed. Yeah.
and you have less bureaucracy and less overhead. I think that's for us, that's the big thing, is in the local government versus the state or the federal government, your overhead, you actually are closer to the taxpayers. And so they look at things like, how many people do you have in your office, and how much work are you doing with the people that you have? And they'll actually compare you to somebody else and say, well, I don't have that many people in my office and I do twice the work that you're doing,
Yeah.
kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
Local government is more closely tied to that kind of mentality.
Yeah. Yeah. I do like that perspective. And when you mentioned it earlier, but the Who Moved My Cheese, right? Spencer Johnson's book. And I think it ought to be mandatory reading for just about anybody, right? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what your job or role or responsibility is. Everybody needs to look at it through a different lens or a different microscope and look for
Mhm.
ways that they can add value and contribute. And I think one of the things that we always try to reiterate through this series is, just because you don't maybe have the job title, maybe you're not, you're marked as a leader, or maybe you don't have the title that, denotes that. anybody and everybody can come in, and no matter what your role or responsibility might be, and look at things through a discerning eye and come back and say, hey, what about this? Have we tried this? Or there's a different way to go about this, which is how you get, 121 days whittled down to 71 hours or whatever, right?
Right.
I mean, that's a perfect example of that. I just think that there's so much value there, and we don't necessarily teach the younger generation as they're coming in how important that is. And when you come to the table with good ideas, not just problems, but you come to the table with some ideas on how to potentially solve it. May not be 100% guaranteed solution, but at least you're trying. People remember you for that. They will positively reflect. And I tell corporate audiences when I get an opportunity to speak to them, it's like you want to be on the list of people that are resourceful, willing to dig in, work a problem till you've got some form of resolution. You become that person that's the go-to person for those things. You become the person nobody puts on a list to let go, right? They need you. You're an essential part of the team.
Yeah, I had a when I was an assistant superintendent for business services at Clear Creek, the assistant superintendent of curriculum in a cabinet meeting was told by the superintendent, when I'm not here, you're my number two guy. You're in charge. And so he looked at me later and he said, what do you think about that, Rick? I'm the number two guy here. And I said, that sounds good to me because I'm the go-to guy. Okay. When he needed something done, who did he go to? He would
Yeah,
come to me and say, I need this done.
I love that.
So you can have a title, you can do all you want, but if you're not the go-to person, if you're
Yeah,
not the one that's in the room, if you're not the one that's coming up with solutions, who cares?
that's right. I love that. I love that. I mean, I could talk to you all day about leadership. You're just a very, very interesting person, and I love the stories and the philosophy. But I want to be respectful of your time, and just have a few final questions to ask you. When you think about what doesn't get taught about leadership, what do you think we need to do to shift and do things maybe differently? So someone that's out there maybe hearing your words, has tuned into this series, and they're not getting the title, but they want to step up and show leadership. What do you think people could learn, or what do you think we need to be teaching them?
Well, I think that one thing that is missing, and especially in the younger people today, is loyalty.
Yes.
Loyalty begets loyalty. If I'm loyal to my boss and I help my boss, um, you would hope, not always, it doesn't always happen, but in a lot of cases it does. The boss takes care of you.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that and bringing value to the table, demonstrating how you can create value, or how you can help the boss look good by bringing value to that table. Because if they feel like you're always contributing solutions rather than problems, or when you bring a problem you have a solution or several solutions that they can pick from and everything, they admire that more than somebody who just brings a problem to them and expects them to solve it.
Yeah.
So I would say that, and I think that always, and with that loyalty thing also comes this, what I call, it's a caveat of always take care of your people. If so, like for example, I run into this all the time. People will have rules about, well, the day starts at 7:30 or 8 o'clock and it ends at 4:30 or 5, right? Nine to 5 kind of thing. But I get it all the time. I have these young mothers that come to me and say, hey, my kid gets out of school at 3:30. If I come in to work at 6:30, can I leave at 3:30? And most bosses would say, nope, 7:30, 4:30.
Yeah.
I say, if you give me my 8 hours, or in public schools we work 7.5 each day.
Yeah.
I said, if you give me my 7.5 hours every day, I don't care when you come in. Okay. As long as I get my 7.5 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And then they'll come into me, and that then builds loyalty and wanting to get the job done for me. They want to go that extra mile for me because I went that extra mile for them
Yeah.
and gave them an opportunity. Now, people also know that if they abuse it, they stand me up, I'm not going to be happy, and life could get a little bit miserable for you then.
There's
Okay,
consequences.
there's consequences, but I feel like you work with people, you're going to get a lot more work out of them, and they're going to be happier, and they're going to get. I mean, what do you care when they come in or when they leave, as long as you got your time?
Yep. Yep.
What's the big deal? You know,
Exactly. Yeah. I love
being
that.
that flexible, being kind of understanding. We all have lives,
Yeah.
and lives have gotten busier over time. And I got a young man now. I'm trying to get his job description changed so that he can make more money. But I say to him, I promise you nothing. I have no power to raise your salary or anything like that. But here's what I'm going to try and do for you. And if they know that you're trying, then they're going to work for you harder and
Yep.
make you not regret that you worked for them to get them that new position.
Yep.
And so I just, that's how I believe you have to do things.
Well, and I think, people know where they stand with you. Number one. Number two, I think you go about it being very fair, but also you do something that I'm sure you see it, but didn't necessarily vocalize it. But that that investment in them has a residual payoff that
Mm-hmm.
often is hard to define, but it's there in form of loyalty and commitment, and they'll show up and do. I don't have to check the 7.5 hours because I just know it's done, and that allows us to move on and focus on bigger things because I know the fundamentals are happening. I like to call it, when I think about leadership, it's the blocking and tackling. I don't have to worry about that, but it's they will show up and do what they need to do because you've earned that from them, right? You've got that kind of loyalty and commitment. I think that's awesome. If you had to boil, let's call three pieces of leadership advice, what would they be? Like maybe values or ethics, or your approach. What are three things that you look for in a leader?
I I use it. I learned this in the procurement arena. I have what I call, and I think it's applicable to leadership as well. I call it the FIT rule. You have to be fair, inclusive, and transparent.
Love it.
You follow those three rules, and your people will follow you into the hellfire.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, People will never question your integrity. Okay. People will always say, "Well, I got a fair shake from him." You know, he included me in the decision making process, and he was always transparent. He didn't hide things from us. He kept us informed, um, kept us up to date on things. I love it when my board will say, "Well, you guys are, you're." I've had board members at board meetings say I'm in the tank for vendors. That I'm a crook or whatever they want to say. And I said, no, no, that's not true at all. I said, I don't play favorites. The only friend I have is my dog, and I drink alone at the bar. So there.
I love that.
So
Oh,
if you're fair, inclusive, and transparent, all of that stuff just falls into place, and
it
nobody
does.
says anything. Then they
I
don't question
love.
your integrity. They don't question what you're doing. You know, you're an open book.
Yeah. Except you won't tell them which bar you drink at.
No, no, I don't tell them that, and I drink at the end of the bar so that nobody can sit next to me.
I love that. Last question: if you could put uh, a phrase or a quote or just a piece of advice on a billboard that everybody would see on the way into work every day or on their way to school about what your philosophy might be for leadership, what would it be? Doesn't even actually have to be leadership. It could be anything.
Well, I do have a favorite quote, and I have a good person that I've done business with, time and again. He and I have met and everything, and he loved this quote that I had up on a whiteboard. That it basically it's went something like this: that if you don't invite me to the if you don't include me in the takeoff, don't invite me to the crash landing.
Love that.
So so that was essentially, I had that up there, and I had a picture. I had a picture from the internet of this airplane that it, was sticking up in the ground, and everything. So, but that's where that inclusive thing comes. We have too many people, especially in the bureaucracy, is that power is, I know more information than you. Yeah. And I have more people that report to me. So therefore I have a bigger title and everything like that. And I view that as a recipe for failure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. You have to include everybody because you never know where the best idea is going to come from.
Yep.
Okay. Men and women who are successful leaders include everybody to the table. I had the good opportunity when I was in the service. My last duty assignment was in Berlin when the Berlin Wall fell. Oh. And one of the things that I got to do was I got to listen to the ambassador from West Germany on his way out the door because Germany was unifying and we had a new president. He was going to appoint his ambassador. And this guy, I'll never forget, he had worked for Ronald Reagan, and one of the things, one of the reasons the Berlin Wall fell was the stuff that Reagan put into place during his presidency that caused the Soviet Union just basically to implode and collapse. Yep. And so he said he was in a meeting and there was all these people from the cabinet and the Pentagon and everything around. And Reagan was the brand new president. It was like 1980, 81. And he was trying to figure out how do we defeat the evil empire, the Soviets, right?
Yeah.
And they had, if you ever sit in the cabinet room, they have all these junior guys sitting around and you'll see it. If you see the president, you see all these people sitting in chairs behind them and everything. Well, those are the aides and the assistants and everything that are there just to provide input and paperwork and everything. They're not supposed to talk, or anything like that. So Reagan was sitting there going, well, how do we defeat the Soviet Union? He said the generals gave them, they got us 7-1 on tanks. They got us 4-1 on planes. They're 10-1 on people. It's a hopeless cause.
Yeah.
And Reagan looked them all and said, gentlemen, there has to be something that we have that they don't have that is a weakness for them. And he said, he was listening and he said, from the corner of this room comes this voice from this aide that says, well, we have more money than they do. And Reagan turned around to the voice and he looks at the voice and he said, what did you say? Now this guy, his boss turns around and looks at him. He's trying to sink as low as he can, so that nobody knows he just said something, right? And the guy says, well, we have more capital than they do. They can't raise capital. They can't raise money. We can outspend them.
Yeah.
And that's what Reagan then pounded his desk and he said, that's it. He said, we're going to outspend them. And that's when he came out with Star Wars. And he said, I'm willing to spend $10 billion. Well, in 1981, 82, $10 billion. I know 36 trillion, right? What? Yeah. 10 billion. That's like 10 minutes in the government today.
That's right.
But back in those days, $10 billion was an unheard of sum of money. And he was right. The Soviets did not have the capitalization to do that. And that's why their government collapsed then. Yeah. Because they tried to keep pace with us spending money and they didn't have it.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great story. I love that. Well, there's so many different ways we could take this. We may have to do a follow-up episode. There's just so many nuggets that you shared, but I just want to personally thank you. I appreciate your time and your wisdom. We covered a lot more than I thought we were going to cover, which is really, really great. I mean, anytime you work a Reagan, conversation into that, or Reagan into the conversation, I mean, that's a pretty good conversation. Because that guy definitely knew about leadership for sure. But if you think about all the examples that you shared today, I just want to thank you so much for being a part of this.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Well, we will be back again with another episode of Leadership as a Contact Sport. But until then, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Gay. Have a great rest of your day.